Hello and welcome to the very first online class for the 2023 NSD. This is Venetia Ramsey from Scrapworks. In my workshop today we are going to cover the basics of distress inks. Okay, distress inks come in these nice 3" by 3" pads, the big pads, or you can get the little minis. Okay, they also come in and like that, and you've got nice, the minis have nice little storage containers that make it very easy to travel with. For today's workshop though, I'm going to be working with the bigger pads. Okay, so just a few things to note about distress inks. Distress inks are a dye-based ink, and because they're dye-based, they have a soluble color which allows the colors to blend really well together and will create a translucent effect. You can see here on my little example what I mean. So the colors blend really well together, and they you can see through them. Because of this translucent nature, dye-based products are perfect to use on light surfaces, but they won't show up, well, they won't be visible on a dark surface. The distress ink pads themselves are layers and layers of fabric that they then inject ink into them. So regardless of how you store your pads, the ink is in here. So unless you add pressure, the ink is not going to come out. So if I turn this over, we'll do it on this one. So if I just push down gently like that, I'm not going to get any ink out. I'll use the dark one. Okay, so a light press, that's about the effect that I'm going to get. But if you push down hard, you're going to start to see ink come through. So storage for your distress inks, it doesn't matter whether you store them this way around or this way around. The ink is suspended inside here and will only move when you add pressure. If you live in a very hot, humid area like I do, then my advice is not to store them this way, because the ink pads will sweat and then they do leak a little bit. Okay, so ladies, I am going to run through some of the supplies you need for today's class. And hopefully by the end of this workshop, I've converted you into mixed media enthusiasts. So for today's workshop, we are going to need a couple of supplies. I'm going to be working with the Vicky Booten White Foundations Mixed Media Art Paper. I find her paper to be a very thick paper, and that it holds up to a lot of wet medium. It's also coated, so you can really lather on that product without the paper warping too much. There will be a bit of warping, but not like with other mixed media paper. Obviously we are covering distress ink today, and we will need some distress ink colors. To make it easier, I'm only going to work with two colors. I'm going to work with Speckled Egg and Vintage Photo. Then we need a way to get the ink onto the paper, so I'm going to be working with blending tools and the replacement foams. Got them all in my hand here. Okay, and then also the domed foams. I'm going to show you how nicely that works. And then the option to work with blending brushes. And then you will need a watercolor brush or any kind of paintbrush. I like to work with a round one, so we can just mix the ink around. Okay, and then another way to get ink onto your page is you will need a piece of acetate. Okay, I have that, a very handy little tool to have on your side. Besides that, the few little extra things to add, make it interesting. I'm going to be using some stamps. So these are the eccentric stamps, and this is just a script stamp. And then I have some stencils off to the side. I also just chose a selection here with different, so some words and text, numbers, dots, like a repetitive pattern, and then also this kind of circly one. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it yet. And then off to the side, I have my archival inks. So you need a couple of those as well. You need any kind of permanent ink that won't move with water. I have some extra stamp blocks in case I need those. You will need your heat gun. Mine is off to the side here. And obviously you'll need some water in a sprayer, and then water in a cup off to the side. Also, then it just helps with to pick water up to add to you'll see how we're going to do it in a bit. Okay, so I'm just going to have that off to the side like that so don't knock it over. There we go. Right, so and then once we're done with everything, we're going to be making some cards. I'm going to run through some quick cards. So I've chosen to use the sentiments from this collection, and all I've done is I've just pre-stamped a couple of sentiments that I plan to use for it. So if you're wanting to convert your backgrounds that you make today into cards, you will also need 6. We'll make 6 cards. You will also need 6 card bases. Okay, then obviously to pick ink up, you're going to need some paper towels. I like to take mine off the rolls so that it's easier to get to when I'm teaching a class. And I also have some wet wipes that I've pulled out of the container already. And then I have a nappy, a cotton nappy that I use then to blot off excess ink and things like that. Alright, so I think I've covered everything. I might add a bit of washi tape, I might not, we'll see how it goes. Obviously you'll need, if you're going to make the cards, you're going to need some glue for that as well. Alright, so let's get working on some of what the distress inks can do. So I'm going, like I said, I'm going to stick with 2 colors, Speckled Egg and Vintage Photo. If you are unfamiliar with distress inks are a dye-based ink. They are very water reactive, so they react really well to water. And you can create some awesome backgrounds using them. Okay, I want to show you what the difference with working with these inks if you work on a normal card that's just your normal cardstock, or hasn't been prepped. Then I've prepped this one with clear gesso so that you can see what it's going to look like, and I've prepped this piece with white gesso. So all of this is just normal scrapbooking cardstock that you have on hand. I don't normally work on this matte, but because the light is very annoying, I use this to cover that up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just do it with one color. I'm going to squish some ink on I push on the ink pad and dispense ink onto the mat. Give it a spray, and this is the normal card. There's no prepping on that. We're just going to dip that in and pick that up, and you will see how it picks it up. Even though I've wetted, it just picks it up like that. So just basically, because the paper is uncoated, just sucks that ink in. So if we did the same thing on a piece of plain cardstock, your normal cardstock that's been coated with clear gesso. So I'm not breaking the ink up because I want you to get normally we would break it up, but you'll see later. So this is prepped with clear gesso. If we put that on, and you can see where I haven't put the gesso, how the ink is pulling through. So it's sucking right through, exactly like it did with this one where the ink came through. And then where the clear gesso is, you can see how nicely it is reacted. It's giving you the effect that you would want. So there are always ways to work with the product if you don't have a good quality mixed media paper. You can easily prep what you have with some clear gesso. Okay, and the gesso I prefer to use with this, the clear one, I use the Primo's Art Basics gesso, the clear transparent one. I like the way that works. Okay, then the next one, on my card I've used white gesso to prep. Also the Art Basics from Primo. Okay, I've used a heavy gesso white. Okay, so again I've just put it on here, and I did everything beforehand just so that it would have a chance to dry. Okay, and again I'm just going to put it down, and you can see exactly where I didn't get the gesso because I just did it down the middle, how it sucks up the paper, the ink sucks up into the paper. And then if you lift that up, you can see just get a little bit more ink on there. You can see the difference of how the inks react with the different surfaces underneath. Okay, so the surface that you work on is very important for the effectiveness of the product. So if you use just plain cardstock, you are going to be disappointed by the result if you're wanting to add water like I'm doing. If you have only plain cardstock, then prep your surfaces either with clear gesso or white gesso. So you can see, because I used the white here, the ink reacts slightly different on white gesso than what it does on the clear gesso. So you need to decide what effect you're trying to create and then use that to create your different backgrounds. So I'm going to dry these, and you'll see also that the effect, the color will change once it's dry. So there you go. That's them nicely side by side. So this is on your normal cardstock that hasn't been prepped, which is not designed to take on so much wet medium, and that is what the result we get. So I think we often set ourselves up for failure because we want to practice techniques on the cheaper cardstocks because we want to save the more expensive one, and then you don't pursue it after this because you just think you can't get it right. But your surface that you choose to work on is very important. So here we go, normal cardstock prepped with clear gesso, and that's quite a nice effect that it's created. It's allowed the inks to move and wick the way they're supposed to. And then remember, with white, because you've put white underneath, there's a bit of pigment in there, it does change how the color reacts. It just gives you a lighter color. So if you were wanting to build up, you would just keep adding, you would wet and add another color. So we can do that so that I can show you. So we can do the same thing. I'm just going to do exactly what I've been doing. I'm not going to break the ink up, you'll see now. And we'll just put that on and just rub that in to pick up the ink. And if we lift it up, you can see, and you will dry between the layers, and each time you dry, the color will get a little bit darker and darker, but you won't get, I don't think you're going to get to this intensity of color. Okay, so I'm just going to put this aside for the moment. So now why do I insist, or do I suggest that you use a good quality mixed media cardstock paper that is made for mixed media? So this is the Vicky Bouton Foundations paper. We're going to do that exact technique. I'm just going to squish ink onto the mat. I'm going to wet that this time because I want a comparison. I'm not going to break the ink up. I'm just going to drop the mixed media paper, Vicky Bouton's mixed media paper, into here. Okay, so I'm working dry on wet. Lift this up and just look at how awesome that works. And I think that by using clear gesso, is the closest effect that you're going to get to this one. So so we can dry this now, and I'm going to use this as my foundation. You can see that it's picked up because I didn't break the ink up, and obviously I didn't put enough water here. It's picked up the little dots. Here I did it very, very lightly. All right, so you can see how nicely that works. I just want this to run down a little bit. Okay, so again, I can't emphasize the importance of using a good quality mixed media paper when you're wanting to do mixed media effects. If you're unable to do that, if you have lots of normal cardstock on hand and don't want to outlay on a mixed media paper, then using the clear gesso to prep your paper will give you a very similar effect. It's still a bit lighter, but yeah. Right, so I've dried it as much as it needs to. This little pool of ink I can just pick up with the paper, with my nappy. All right, so there we go. So there's mixed media paper. There's with the clear gesso, there's with white gesso, and there's without. So I think this kind of proves that the kind of surface you use is important if you're starting out. So don't start out on your cheaper cardstock. and think you're going to first perfect the techniques before you move on to your more expensive cardstock, you are just going to set yourself up for failure, and the possibility of pursuing a mixed media adventure dies right here. Okay, so there are options to be able to carry on to venture into the mixed media world without it costing you an arm and a leg. Right, so I'm going to put these three aside, and we're going to carry on working with the one that we started to put some ink onto. So you saw how I squished it. So the ideal normally when I work with this kind of technique, where I apply the inks directly to my surface like this and then wet that, one of the things I like to do is then just break that ink up. You can use your finger or you can use a brush, whichever you prefer. So it's always good, I think, then to break the ink up like that. Okay, I already have some ink on here, so I'm just going to go in now and just put on that second layer. You can squish it in like I've done, or you can just go in and pick ink up here and there, and then we're just going to dry that. Okay, so while it's drying, if you want the ink to move a little bit more, you can go in and add some water. So just by spritzing water up, it just breaks up the pool of ink, right? Then I also like to hold my surface up so that I find that it just dries a little bit quicker than if I keep it flat on the surface. Just lifting it up that little bit just helps. And if ink is pooling in areas that you don't want it to, you can always go in and just pick up with a paper towel, or I prefer to work with the toweling nappy. And there we go. You can see how awesome we are able to build up some color like that. Right, we can just clean up this. So the next thing I would want to do, I'm just going to stay with one color here, I'm not going to add another one just yet, is I would like to now add some more color to the places that I've missed, but I really don't want to put more on my mat. So one of the things I do is I bump my distress ink up against my mixed media mat, okay, and then I will use a blending tool and replacement foam, and I use this to pick the ink up. So I don't need to bring this in and hold it and let go and go, and this doesn't move all the way around. It's here on the side, and my mat then, because it bumps up, it holds it in place so that I can pick up as much ink as I need. So I know that it looks like I don't have much ink on my foam, but then I would blend my ink on. So I would start off the mat, hold the blending tool at an angle, and work in a circular motion and slowly build ink up around the edges. You can see that it's starting to, so put some ink on, and then I like to put my finger over the little tool like that and hold it, because this way I can use pressure. I can put pressure and take pressure off depending on how much I want. I find it very hard to add pressure like this, but this way I seem to be able to control how much pressure I add to my blending. So remember, start off your mat, work on in a circular motion, and you can see that I hold it at an angle. I'm not working flat. I hold my tool at an angle so that just this part of so basically here, just here hits the surface, and I'm able to control how much ink I add to my surface without creating brush marks, or in this case blending tool marks. So I would just keep doing that to add. Okay, so once you've got that first layer on, and I still really want to get rid of some of that white, that is then, once I've got this motion going and this slow, I can then drop my tool so that it's flat and then work it on, because now I'm not going to leave any of the foam marks behind, because I think that also happens to a lot of people where they end up with the brush marks. But it's all about adding layers. So you've got to add that first layer, that foundation layer. A lot of people refer to it as breaking the page. So you get that first layer of color on, then you add on another layer and another layer till you're happy. And then I call this my final layer, where I'm quite happy with how much you know, I've covered. I don't want any white spots. If that's what you wanted, then you would obviously leave this step out. But there you go. There's a really awesome background created for us to be able to add on some extra layers. Right, so let's try that wrinkle-free technique using more than one color. So we're going to apply, I'm going to squish on some of my vintage photo, and then I'm going to do the same. I'm going to add some speckled egg over here and a little bit over there. Remember, you need to add quite a bit of pressure to get your ink to come out of the ink pad. I'm going to wet that. I will use a brush to break up the ink, because I don't want those little square and little bits, random bits. So I'm just going to break it up like that. Right, and then this time I'm going to wet my cardstock just a little bit, and I'm going to pop that down inside exactly the way we did. I'm not going to swipe it through. I like to put it down and do like a print. We'll lift that up, and that's kind of what you get. All right, so it's very light. The speckled egg is very light, but we can build that color up, and I will show you how we do that. All right, so get that to move around a little bit and dry that. Remember, if the ink pools anywhere that you don't like it, you can either pick it up with a paper towel or your nappy, or if you want it to carry on moving, you can use water. If I hold it like this, water to get that ink to move. Okay, there we go. You can see it moving now. Oops. I'm going to hold it like this so that it just get it to dry a bit. And I know on screen you can barely probably see the speckled egg, but it's there. We'll get there. Okay, that is dry enough for now. I'm not going to clean up this the vintage photo there, but I am going to take off this little bit of speckled egg, and I'm going to add some more. Okay, and I'm going to wet that, break up the ink. You can see it now. And I'm going to aim to just put some ink here. So I'll hold this part up, and I'm going to just make a print of this ink over here so that I can build up my layer. Lift it up, and there we go, already starting to come through. I don't like that it's mixed here and made a little bit of a tealy color, so I'm going to lift that up there and over here as well. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to give that a dry. And you can see here where I didn't break the ink up properly. It makes those little speckles, which sometimes you want, sometimes you don't, but I kind of just go with it. If it's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not. I'm quite happy with that. That's enough. So I can see where it's shiny still, so I'm just going to go in and pick up that wet ink like that. There we go. And then I'm going to pick on my mix media mat. I'm going to pick up the bigger blobs of ink. So I don't want them. I want those small blobs. There we go. So I set up my color palette and I just want to tap this in here, not too hard, just a little bit, so that I get that. Okay, like that, right? And I didn't pick those ones up there so that I could do the same. Right, so there we go. I'm happy with the way that's turning out. So we can clean up the media mat to be sure there's no color left behind. I just give it a spritz and a dry. Okay, so I'm happy with the way that's turned out. I'm just going to leave it to sit on there for a little bit. These ones I'm going to go in and pick up. Those ones I'm going to leave on. I just want to pick up some of the water, and those ones I'll leave there, so we'll just give that a dry. And there we go. I'm happy with the way that's turned out. And remember, these are my foundation, my bases, right? So this, we'll leave them there, and then you can see. So wrinkle-free, you kind of get what you get, and there's nothing you can really do about it. You have to work with it. My favorite way to add ink to paper is to use a piece of acetate, right? So the same idea. I'm going to start with a lighter one this time. Same idea is to add your ink to your piece of acetate. So I'm going to put some speckled egg on here. I've got quite a bit going on there, right? And we're going to wet that. You can either wet it with your mister, or you could pick water up and then just add some water to it like this. But again, I'm going to break up the ink. I do find that if you miss the surface that you're working on, your inks do blend slightly better. So now all I'm going to do is take this and add the ink to my surface, right? So it's like a seesaw. You start in one end and you move the ink this way, and then you go back this way. And you will see that if I start here and I move, can you see all the ink pools there, and then it goes back to pool there. So you need to find your flow where you're able to get the ink to move the way you want it to. Okay, so I would like to cover the entire sheet with ink, but I don't want to use a blending tool, and I don't want to use the sprays. So this is a really nice way to do it. So it's called the kissing technique, and if you follow Vicky Booten, you will find that she uses this kind of technique to add ink to her paper on very, very often. Most of the time, that's how she gets ink on. I think using the kissing technique is an awesome way to add ink to paper, especially if you are I'm a scrapbooker, and I like to work on the 30 by 30, and so you can see here how I was able to cover my whole page just using the technique I just showed you now. It's a nice, simple but effective way to get ink onto your paper. So you can then dry this, or you could leave it wet. I'm going to dry mine. So remember, if I added my vintage photo to this now, wet on wet, the colors would blend. If I want the color to sit on top, which I do, then I want to add a wet ink to a dry surface. So remember, wet on wet blends, dry, wet on dry covers. So, oops, it would help if I put my acetate down. Right, let's try that again. Right, we're going to add some vintage photo. I've added it to the acetate. I'm going to spritz that. I'm going to use my brush to break up the ink. You'll notice I didn't put on as much of the vintage photo as I did the salvage patina, because it is a little bit darker. So now I can choose. So I think it needs a little bit more water. I can now choose where I would like to add the brown. So I can go here, and I can add a little bit here. And again, you can see there's the control about where it goes, and I can add some here. And then I can go in and then just tap, tap. Right. So one thing I do suggest you don't do is, when I'll do it on here, when you put your ink down, don't use your thumb, your nail, because it will leave marks where it'll leave your nail mark in your on your page. So your best bet is, if you're wanting to like I'd like that one to just move a little bit more, put it down and use my finger then to move the ink where I want it to be. Okay, so I'm happy with the way that's turned out. Right, I'm going to go in, and wherever there are blobs of ink, I want to go in and pick them up. So they will go a little bit lighter. I want to pick them up before I dry it. Like that. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to dry that, and then whatever's left I will pick up. And there we go. I think that's looking quite nice. I'm going to take off that little bit of, there we go. Right, so I'm happy with that. I would, however, like to add this kind of effect over there, and one of the ways to do that is to with paint, to just splatter it on. So I'm going to pop some ink on my acetate. I'm going to wet that, and then I'm going to use my paintbrush to splatter on some ink, so I can control exactly where it's going to be. Well, you can't really control exactly where it's going to be. There we go. And then again, if I want some of them to be a bit bigger, I can just go in and add so that it kind of matches this. There we go. I'm happy with that. Okay, so I'm not going to dry these. I'm going to leave them off to the side so that they can just marinate over there. So if you are not keen on the acetate or the wrinkle-free or the mixed media, another way to add ink to your paper then is with blending. All right, I think that's where most of us start, is with blending. So I'm going to start by doing half my page with the vintage photos. So all I'm doing is picking up vintage photo distress ink, and I am just working in a circular motion to add ink to my background. Like I said to you in the beginning, distress ink is translucent, so you can see that it came on very light, but as I'm going and adding a layer after layer, I'm able to get more and more color on, and I can then get to the intensity of the color that I would like it to be. So I could either have it very light, or I can keep adding ink until I get it to the depth of color that I would like it to be. Okay, so just normal blending. Like I showed you, I started off on the side, working at holding the tool at an angle, and then as my layers have progressed, I'm able to drop the brush to work with it flat to be able to blend in and create a more blended kind of effect. So now I'm going to add speckled egg to the other side. We're going to do the same thing, but remember I've got brown here now from working with it, so you would need to clean it up first before you start with the next color. Right, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pick up the speckled egg, start on the edge. You can hear the squeak squeak. It'll go away now. It's just brand new foam. Right, so once I've got that first layer on, working in a circle, I'm going to get some on the side here. And then start to blend this on. So there's no reason why you have to stick with one. You don't have to only blend or only do the wet technique. We could have easily put that speckled egg on using the kissing technique and then blended on some of the vintage photo. But you can see, to work in an area like this, to blend on does take a lot more time than the way we did it there, but the effect that you get is a much smoother transition of color. It comes on smooth and it looks a little bit softer. So it really depends on the kind of background or technique or the kind of effect that you are trying to create. Right. So there's no right or wrong way. It really just depends on the feel that you are going for with whichever project you are working on. So now I'm going to work through the middle, and what I want to do is get some of the salvaged the speckled egg. I want some of the speckled egg to move over the vintage photo like that, so that I get a nice blend, and you'll see that it will also change color slightly. It'll go like a tealy color, and then I will go in with whatever's left on my foam and just blend a little bit from the vintage photo into this speckled egg to create that kind of effect. Okay, I'm not going to add more ink, I'm just going to use what's on my foams. There we go. So there we can create finger marks. See, I didn't clean my fingers. So the best is then just to blend that out. I'll go in and just try and move them out, but I'm not too concerned because a lot of this I'm going to trim off when I add it to my background. So not only must you clean your surface, you need to clean your hands too. Get the brown off. So there we go. That's another one done and dusted. Right, so we've added ink in very different ways. I'm going to do this next one. I'm going to add ink using the Wrinkle-free. I'm going to add the speckled egg using my acetate, and then I'm only going to add the speckled egg. I'm not going to add any other color, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do with this one. All right, so I'm going to take that, break it up. Remember, I like to have work wet on wet, and I'm just very quickly going to get some color on the background because I want to do something very different with this one, but I need color on to be able to show you. Right, there we go. And remember, you use the acetate to move the ink around your surface to get it to where you want to go. It's going to, look there, it's going to make like an air bubble and pool. So if I just pull it off there, that's where my ink is going to stay. And you can then use that to your advantage to create different kind of effects. So I want it to stay kind of there. There we go. Happy with that? Right. So I'm not going to dry this one off just yet. I'm just going to put it off to the side for the ink to dry more or less by itself. Okay, so besides working on smooth surfaces like that, you could also put your paper through an embossing folder, which I've done here. And then again, we can add ink like that. We can use this, I'm going to show you. I'm going to use the acetate to add ink to the surface. The ink's not going to go everywhere that it should. I'm going to try and get it to cover as much as I can, but because it's embossed, we're going to get like a different kind of effect. Right, so I'm going to get ink on like that. You can see the ink basically is taking to the embossed, more to the raised edges than actually getting to the back of the paper. I'll show you now, so you can see there. So it's kind of just gone on the raised bits. So, but I'm going to use my water because I want that ink to move. So I'm just going to spray that like that. Okay. While it's still wet, I'm going to add some more ink to my surface, my acetate. Break it up. And then go back in there and get some more ink onto that. There we go. Look how awesome that's starting to look. So you will see that where there's where it's raised, the ink is pooling in those little ridges, in the valleys. You just need to play and find things that work for you. Okay, I'm happy with that. Right, so that one I'm going to dry. And I'm going to dry this one as well, and then I will be back in a bit. Right, so there we go. Then almost dry. Like I said, I've still got a few little goodies I need to pick up, so I'm just going to use a paper towel to pick up some of that ink. I think that that's as nice, comfortably dry for me to be able to add the next step. Right. Be 100% sure that there's nothing left behind. There we go. Just going to put this up out the way for now. Right, so the next thing that we can then do with this one, we'll come to get to that one in a bit. So to create this background, we can now add some stenciling. So you can pick and choose whatever kind of stencil you would like to use. I'm going to use this one. And I'm just going to put my stencil, I'm just going to have these little circles running down, kind of down the middle. Like that, okay, and I am going to use a blending brush. I'm going to show you the difference between a blending brush and a domed foam, and we'll do it on both on the same. All right, so the domed foam will allow the ink to go on a little bit darker than your brush. Your brush will allow you to add the ink lightly. So the blending brush allows you to add ink at a little bit of ink at a time, and it comes on nice and light, so you can blend a little bit better. You have a little bit more control. Again, if you add pressure like I just did now, the ink will come on a little bit darker, but if you keep a light hand, oops, and blend, then we'll get this a softer brush kind of an effect. It's very soft and gentle. Okay, and then like I said, here where I add the pressure, once you've loaded up, add a bit of pressure, you can then deepen the color like that. We'll get the effect when I lift up now. So it doesn't mean that you have to go between the two. You don't have to use just the one and then the other. This just allows you to get that first layer of ink on, and then you can choose the intensity that you want it to be by adding pressure to the bristles of the brush. So basically pushing down here to get it on. Right, so I'm just going, I don't want to do the whole background, I just want to do a piece of it, and I'll show you what it looks like now. Right, so if I lift that up, see how awesome that has turned out. I'm not worried too much about here because I'm going to trim it to go on my card front. Okay, so that is one way to add a little bit of extra ink to your stenciling to your background. So I then like to clean off any excess ink off my brush. I will also then use a wet wipe just to take any excess paint ink off my stencil. And I try and dab instead of rub because I don't want to damage any bits of the stencil. I would normally have some water off to the side that I would chuck them in just dump it into but I want to use this one again, so I'm just going to take the ink off very gently. I'm not going to go all crazy, but a nice gentle. And then I always suggest that you clean the back as well, because some ink may have gone through. So just tap, 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 tap to get it off, because if you rub like a crazy person, you will hit these little grooves and little bits and pieces, and they will buckle. Okay, so there we go. So that's ready for me to use again. So there you go, a nice way to create a background half and half. We'll do something else on that piece there. So then for this one, I want to also add some stenciling, and this time I'm going to add, let's do some wording. Yeah. So this time I'm going to add to the entire background. Let's do it, or maybe not this one. Let's use a different one. I'm going to use this one, because I can then line it up a little bit better and make sure I get more words on. Right, so we're going to do it like that. Right, so I'm going to put it on like that, and I'm going to use my foam, the domed foam, and this time I'm going to cover the entire background with the ink. So with the domed foam, you can also go around in circles like that, just to get that first layer of ink on. Okay, but I really like to push and turn, and you can see just how quickly you get, oops, the ink on properly. Just line it up again. Right, so you can go like that, which is the effect you would get if you were using the brush. But I really find that if you put your tool down and you push and twist, you get it to the ink to go through the stencil nice and dark. And again, you can also then decide which bits you want to add ink to and which bits you don't want to. It might be a bit of a long, take a little bit longer than if you were just blending. Okay, but this way I only have to go over an area once. And I'm even going a tone on tone, so I'm even adding the stenciling over the vintage photo that it is at the bottom over here. There we go. And I'll lift that up now. See, and also I think that by doing this, you don't cause as much damage to your foam than doing this, that it gets caught on all those little pieces. So I think by doing it this way, you have a little bit more control, and you can get it, the intensity, quite dark. So if we lift that up, you can see how awesome that looks. Okay, and I like that it goes from the light onto the dark, but that has stayed the same by doing it on the tone on tone. Right, so we've got that. We're not done. We're playing around with backgrounds. Okay, so now this one should be nice and dry. I am going to use my brush and stay with the vintage photo, and then just very lightly start to add ink. I'm not going to add any pressure, because as soon as I add pressure, the ink is going to hit the background more than what I want it to do. And I just want to go around some of the numbers to get them to stand out a little bit. So basically the ink is going to catch on the ridges and just make all of that pop out a little bit. And because of the bristles, I'm also able to get a little bit of ink underneath on the smooth part of the embossing. And I can again pick and choose where I want it to be intense, or how much of it I want to be intense. So here I'm putting a little bit of pressure to get this little piece darker, like that. And then taking off the pressure and going light. So I'd like it to be a bit darker over here, so I'm going to add pressure to my brush and light again over here. I like the way that's turning out. There we go. So here, I just think it needs just a little bit more blending. Like that. And then I want to repeat this at the top here. So I'm just going to add a little bit of pressure here. So it doesn't look like it's just one little spot that I did dark. So it kind of looks like that's exactly what I wanted. Some really dark bits and some light bits. Okay, there we go. So again, just clean off your brush. All right. So there we go. We've got the embossing. We've got some stenciling. We've got some stenciling there, and then we have these ones. Right, so for this one, we can then just spritz on some water, because I'd like to, because ink is, the distress ink is water reactive, we can go in and then just spritz on some water. So I'm just making little blobs of water on here. I'm going to leave that to sit and marinate for a little while. I'll be using one of my paper towels that I have off to the side. I'm just going to give it some time to do its thing, to react with the ink underneath. And then I'll put my paper towel on, and you can see exactly how nicely it's going to lift that ink. And we'll lift that up. And you can always go in and add some more, because like I said, the distress ink will always react with water. So I can go in, that one, these ones I'm not going to leave too long. I'm going to go in and pick them up almost immediately. So even though it's sat off to the side for so long, can you see that the ink is still reacting with water, even though this was so nice and dry? Okay, so if you must always bear that in mind, your inks will always react with water. Okay, so one of the things we can do is just add some, I've already started to do it, is add some splatters to everything. You don't have to do the step if you don't want to, but I think it'll be quite nice, and it'll just tie everything in. And because I'm planning to use these to create cards, it'll be a nice set of 6 cards, and the theme and the colors and everything will kind of run through and be more or less the same. Right, so there you go. These are some awesome backgrounds, and with basically 3 techniques. I showed you wrinkle-free, blending, and then using the kissing technique to be able to add some really awesome, to create some really awesome backgrounds, I think. And this then becomes the foundation for you to build and add more stuff. So I've just used distress ink. I've only used 2 colors. You could get away with using 1 color and just change the intensity of the color to create some texture and dimension on your background. So what I'm going to do with these, once they're nice and dry, I will show you how to use these backgrounds that we've created to create some really simple but effective cards. And I will see you in a bit.